Oh, let me tell you something. Busting makes me feel good.
Hello, everybody. Welcome to Blockbusting, the podcast where we love to hate the movies. I'm your host, Jay Light. Joining me today, my good friend, wonderful comic, roast battler extraordinaire, Joe Eurell.
Hello, how are you doing, Jay?
I'm good. How are you?
I'm good. Very busy with school and, watching Braveheart, which is a great way to avoid my homework.
It's a 3-hour-long movie.
Yeah.
You gotta sacrifice some time for this one. This is the movie you come in to hate today. Is Braveheart.
Yeah, Braveheart, the Mel Gibson, not classic.
So, all right. Before we get into a little of the history of Braveheart, what do you not like about this movie? What is, your top reason for hating it?
Well, it kind of does what a lot of period movies, what a lot of historical movies at this time in the 90s were doing, which they were playing really loose with historical facts. And maybe I'm on the spectrum a little bit, but I kind of feel like, we know what happened. Why don't you tell the story of what really happened without trying to add a bunch of unnecessary bullshit? Like the whole angle about him, impregnating the queen and, all this stuff. That never happened. But Mel Gibson acts like it's a romance novel. And they did that with Robin Hood too, a little bit, the Kevin Costner movie.
Oh, yeah.
Where everybody had an English accent but Kevin Costner, and nobody says anything. But whatever. Hold on, my headphones are...
Oh, you're good, man. Get your headphones right. I'm going to give a little rundown of this movie for a sec. So, Braveheart, if you haven't seen it, like me, and I'm one of the people who have not seen this movie.
That's very admirable.
I managed to keep away from it as long as possible, and I might, depending on how this goes today, I'll probably wind up avoiding it. Braveheart is a 1995 American epic war film directed by Mel Gibson, who stars as William Wallace, a late 13th century Scottish warrior who led the Scots in the First War of Scottish Independence against King Edward I Longshanks of England. It received generally positive reviews, grossed $210 million worldwide, was nominated for 10 Academy Awards, and won Best Picture, Best Director, and a couple below-the-line things. Now, this movie has gotten a lot of notoriety, especially in the past several years, for being wildly, wildly historically inaccurate.
Yeah, it's almost like they were drunk. Like, not just drunk, but end of the line drunk. Like, you're about to have an intervention drunk, and you're writing a movie about William Wallace, and you've just drank a whole case of Johnny Walker, and they didn't even bother to really talk about the actual story. It's a lot better than the movie they made.
Right.
Despite the $2 million. And, I guess at the end of the day, that $2 million that it grossed, or whatever the number...
$210 million.
Oh, well, see, I can't count. I can't walk, I can't count. But that $210 million, that's what matters at the end of the day. But for me, I went to Scotland, I took the Braveheart tour where they tell you the real story.
Mm-hmm.
And the real story of why Bill Wallace, I call him Bill Wallace.
You guys are on a nickname basis?
Yeah. So the reason William Wallace became an outlaw, the real story is basically he was catching fish one day, and he caught 3 fish, and he was stopped by 2 English soldiers who said, "Give me your fucking fish." And he was like, "No, fuck you. I'll give you half. If you're hungry, I'll give you half." But they're like, no, we want the whole thing because they're English. And pretty much he got in a fight with one of them and he killed one of them. So by the law, he was a criminal and an outlaw.
Yeah.
And he said, well, fuck that. I didn't really do anything. I'm just a guy. You know, that part in the beginning of it was oddly accurate. That's the other thing about it is, while it's entirely inaccurate the whole time, there are little nuggets of truth. You know, like his name being William Wallace. You know,
And that's about the most truthful it gets.
yeah. But the other small detail they got right was that his family was not wealthy, but they weren't exactly like 13th century dirt poor either.
Okay.
Like they were one of the oddballs that had like a little bit of land that they owned. And so like maybe they got some sort of like, I don't know how it happened, but the family did have like a little bit of land, and so they had a little bit of means, and a little bit of respect in the community, which is why when he got in trouble, started fighting the English, he had like community credibility, you know what I mean? And so the other thing too is like they don't really give him the credit for like the first battle, the Battle of Stirling.
Yep, I've watched that battle of Stirling, yeah.
Yeah, they leave out the coolest part about what the actual William Wallace, why he won that battle.
What is that? Why did he win?
I forget the actual details, but he tricked part of the English army into a corner. He caught them at like a little valley area, and he killed all of them, as you do.
Right.
And then he took the bodies, and he made a defensive wall.
With the bodies?
Yeah, and that defensive wall was why he was able to hold, you know, Stirling Bridge, and you know.
Now, why wouldn't you put that in the movie? That's such a great detail.
Well, not to, you know, telegraph what my ultimate problem with this movie is. I think this movie is secretly a pro-English movie because the English are depicted as unstoppable, just an insurmountable force.
Right.
And the way the English are portrayed, actually, that's one thing I do like about it. King Edward is played by Patrick C. McGonagall, I think it is.
I believe so. Let me double check that. Patrick McGoohan. Extremely Scottish Irish type of name.
Yeah, he's actually an Irish actor, and this is something I think is really funny in Hollywood and films. It's the worst English villains are always played by really Irish actors.
Yeah?
Like Peter O'Toole is known for playing an English asshole. And what's that movie about Lawrence of Arabia?
Yeah.
Or I think
Lawrence of Arabia.
Yeah, and he, but so they couldn't show the English as they were portrayed in Braveheart. These, frankly, like, kind of, you know, preppy, like, those preppy English. They would have wanted to show them going up against a body wall of corpses, and that was too, like, you know, grotesque at the time.
Right, and that's one of the things, and when I was doing some research on this today, there's a lot of, the movie was originally rated NC-17, and I watched some of the scenes, like I watched the battle at Stirling Hill, I watched the execution scene, I watched the speech that everybody quotes, they'll take our rights, they'll never take our freedom.
Yeah.
This movie, I mean, the Battle of Stirling Hill especially, it's pretty violent, but it doesn't strike me as, like, R-rated violence particularly. Like, I could see how they made some cuts for at the time to make it less violent and bloody. Like there's that one. There's like a cut where where some soldier smashes a dude in the head, and then you just see like blood spurt from under the helmet. I'm like, oh, okay, but that's immediately like as soon as he hits the head and you see that blood splat, they cut to another fight scene, and a dude's like, and people getting swords run through him and castrated, and
it was really brutal. Another part I did like the old man, the old Scotsman who gets his hand cut off, but he's still fighting with one hand. I kind of relate to him. I just felt like that's a weird criticism to have on my part, that I felt like it could have been more violent.
Well, and that's the thing. I think you made a good point when you said it's kind of got a romance novel-y vibe to it, because this movie just at a cursory glance, which is all I was able to have time to give this movie, unfortunately. But even at sort of that just like blip, it feels like a movie that is not made for history buffs. It's made for dudes who want to see some violence and some action, and they want to have a little bit of inspiration thrown in and have a cool speech. But it's not supposed to be. It's kind of like a weird feel good movie.
I've often felt like it was a movie for married couples in the 90s who were trying to make it work for the kids, and so they go see Braveheart, they get inspired, and and
then they don't get divorced.
Yeah, I think that's who it was made for. Even I really hated the score, the music behind it.
Oh, really?
Even though I can't play music, so I'm one to talk. But
right. I mean, if you hated everything you couldn't do, you'd hate any movie where people are walking.
Yeah, exactly. Any movie where people are, able to drive. But, I just felt like it was the story about him marrying the girl and the prima nocta. And, that's the other thing about it. William Wallace, if you look at the way he married his wife in the beginning of the film, it's really creepy. And I'd say that with everything going on in the country right now about, but if you consider the Me Too movement as it is now, the way his father-in-law, I forget the name of that actor, that guy is on a show called Republic of Doyle, which is a really good show in Canada. But so his father-in-law, or who would be his father-in-law, tells him, you can't see my daughter.
Mm-hmm.
And creepy Mel Gibson, just sort of says, oh, well, I'm going to meet her in the forest.
Right.
And,
I mean, if there's anything we've learned about Mel Gibson over the past several years, is that he's definitely not an advocate of the Me Too movement. Yeah. He's not somebody who's ever been concerned with the treatment of women or women's rights.
Boundaries.
Right. He doesn't know when no means no.
Yeah, it's like, well, I'll just marry her in secret and then put her life in danger, and, part of the reason her dad didn't want him getting married was because at the time, the prima nocta thing that they talked about, where an English lord had first night's rights on anybody's wife, that was just a really screwed up time in our history.
Right. That's the other thing too.
That was one of the things. It's one of
the things that a lot of people say is historically inaccurate now too.
Really?
Is that prima nocte didn't exist.
Really?
They say it's a myth.
Well, I'm sure the English did something like that, because that was, the English are also trying to rewrite their own history, and I think this is why it's a reverse English propaganda film, because it makes the English look so cartoonishly villainous and making them guilty of so many fucked up things that they can just make up shit. And then because somebody added prima nocta, even though that wasn't real, they say, oh, well, that's fake. So their whole history of conquest and oppression can also be wiped away too, because they said, oh, you lied about prima nocta. You lied about, like, him marrying the wife,
Right.
but
You lied about him impregnating the queen.
yeah, and so, yeah, exactly, and and of course, the Queen of France. Another reason it's English propaganda film because it's calling the French Queen like sort of what like it's calling her an adulteress.
Right.
See what? Yeah.
I don't know if it's out of line for me to say this or not, but it feels like Highlander movies take sort of a better look and more accurate look at Scottish history than this one does.
Which is ironic, considering that Highlander had a Scottish guy playing an Egyptian guy who was pretending to be Spanish, even though in real life he was Scottish.
Right.
And Sean Connery. And then you have Christopher Lambert, who's German, no, French, pretending to be Scottish.
Yeah.
So, but I agree. Another movie of this time period that does this a little better was Liam Neeson movie, Michael Collins with Julia Roberts and the late great, one of my favorite actors, who's English, Alan Rickman.
Mm-hmm.
I don't think it gets a lot better than Alan Rickman.
He's great.
Personally, and I cried when he died. Not a lot, but just like
just enough.
Yeah, it's just like, oh,
So another thing about this movie is that it's an independent film. It's not a movie that was backed
really
by a studio. Yeah, I mean, it was distributed by Paramount, but it's one of those movies that nobody wanted to make it.
Probably because they read the script as these guys told the story. And they said, this is fucking insane.
Yeah. Well, I mean, even I watched like I said, the very famous speech scene, that's supposed to be this big stirring that may take away. I'm not even going to attempt to do a Scottish accent because I still feel like I do one that's worse than Mel Gibson's.
Lives, but they'll never take our freedom.
And I watched that scene today and I was just like, this is the key for inspiration?
Oh, that's the other thing that sort of trips me out about this movie. I have no proof of this, so this is just me cerebral palsing all over the place. But if you're aware of early Scottish history, and I'm talking like Roman era Scottish history, it kind of feels like the makers of Braveheart were telling the story from Tacitus' History of Rome, where they were talking about the Romans fighting the Picts at Hadrian's Wall, and they even dressed the Scots in blue face paint, and getting naked at one point before the battle with the blue face paint. Pardon me. With the blue face paint, they make them look like the Picts. And the Picts were the early Scots. Not Scots per se, but like
right.
The Romans, when they encountered the early inhabitants of what would have been Scotland, they were blue-faced, but they didn't wear paint. They were actually tattooed, but with blue tattoos. And supposedly a whole Roman legion got wiped out by these guys, which is why they had to build Hadrian's Wall. These guys didn't mess around.
Nah, these guys are vicious.
Yeah.
And that's the thing. There's that new movie coming out. I don't know if you've seen the trailer for it, but the new Robert the Bruce movie.
Oh, they're finally doing that movie?
Yeah, it's coming out, I think, sometime in the next couple of months. And Chris Pine is Robert the Bruce. And
not Angus McFadden.
No.
Angus McFadden is also one of my favorite actors, which is the other part they did get right in this movie about Scottish politics is the way that the English played the Scots against themselves with the use of money. and they did get that right. But I kind of feel like they were kind of telling it was a conglomeration of different parts of Scottish history all into one sort of drunk, you know,
Right.
you know,
And we know how much Mel Gibson loves getting drunk.
yeah, yeah.
I imagine there are probably a lot of references to him hating the Jews that got cut out of the initial draft of this movie.
Yeah, yeah, well, I mean,
Tooth and nail fought to keep him in.
well, I mean, 13th century Scotland would have been a pretty, anti-Semitic place
Oh,
anyway.
yeah.
And so...
That's probably why he loved it so much.
Yeah, and wouldn't you like to see, like, the archives, like, the stuff they have locked away in a fucking vault somewhere? Like, the stuff that keeps them up at night?
Yeah.
Like, the cuts from that movie that, like, him wearing blue face paint, waving a sword, talking about, like, conspiracies and stuff.
Yeah, talking about how Jews control the media and the weather.
Yeah. Which is a very strange attack. It's almost like, you jelly, bro? You jealous?
Well, and the other thing is, so this movie originally, back in the 90s when it was coming out, in 95, it was acclaimed, it received a lot of good critical praise, but it wasn't considered a strong awards contender because it did kind of feel like the sort of rah-rah movie that wasn't really designed to be, it wasn't designed to have any kind of historical accuracy to it. I mean, there's a lot of, there's holes that you can poke in it, even besides just William Wallace's story. Queen Isabella would have been 2 years old at the time of the stuff that was going on in this movie. They're not supposed to be wearing kilts. Kilts are not introduced into culture for several years after.
Like 400, I think.
Yeah.
400 more years. That didn't become, the way we think of kilts now, actually, it came from actually the 17th century onward. I bet you didn't know I know this much about Scottish history. But
I mean, you have a fighting Irish tattoo on your forearm, so I wasn't sure if you were more aligned with the Scots or the Irish.
Well, for a long time, the cultures are pretty much, it's like the difference between, wild turkey and Jim Beam.
Oh, okay.
So it's not a lot of variation there. But I like the fact that they got the weapons right. The detail about what kind of weapons would have been used. Mm-hmm. Of course, they got that right, though. This movie is sort of like the Donald Trump of Best Pictures. Like, him winning Best Picture, it's kind of like Donald Trump winning the presidency. I really feel that way, because you're like, this is supposed to happen?
Right.
Like, this isn't, this isn't accurate in any way.
And there's the other thing, like, okay, the other Best Picture nominees that year were Apollo 13, Babe, Il Postino, and Sense and Sensibility. And then the movie that won Best Original Screenplay, which is sort of historically looked at as the movie that, like, we should probably have given Best Picture to if it didn't win the award already, like what we do with Get Out this year. Best Original Screenplay that year went to The Usual Suspects.
What?
Yeah. Braveheart was nominated for Best Original Screenplay.
That's so weird.
But Usual Suspects didn't even get nominated.
And it's weird because I think Apollo 13 was a way better movie.
I have a soft spot for Babe. I think Babe is a really good movie.
I would have been, I think I was 8 years old.
And I think I was 5. But the other thing is, so now people are looking back on it, and it's not regarded as a good Best Picture winner. Like Empire Magazine, which at the time gave the movie a really good rating and said it was, I think they rated it the best of 1995. This is, in 2005, they made a list, and it was the 10 worst movies to have ever been awarded the Best Picture Oscar. And this was the number one choice for worst movie to win Best Picture.
It's I gotta be honest, this is gonna go really far, so I can tell you're gonna, you might get uncomfortable here, but I kind of feel like in some ways, Braveheart is so insane that one could argue, Tommy Wiseau's cult classic The Room it's a better movie than Braveheart.
You know, I actually would rather watch The Room than Braveheart. I don't have any desire to see Braveheart.
Well, you know what? I was thinking about as you were going through all that about the awards and stuff and how it was received and how it's kind of been re-looked at, reappraised. And it kind of seems like maybe in 1995 that there was a meeting among all the people in power, and they're like, look, we need to just praise this movie so Mel Gibson doesn't go on a rampage against us all, and we'll just say, yeah, Mel, it's a great movie. It's Best Picture. Yeah.
And then he still went on the rampage.
Yeah, well, that wasn't until when was the Sugar Tits thing?
Let's see. When was the Sugar Tits thing? Let's take a look.
By the way, those are his words, not mine.
Right. Okay, this was 2006, 10 years later.
Okay, see,
11 years later, excuse me.
See, like, I really think they're like, because I get the sense that Mel Gibson is sort of an aggressive alcoholic, so they're probably just like, look, we need to just make him feel good for a little while, and then we'll just act like this never happened. We'll write articles saying that we never wanted to do this. Like, it's almost like Mel Gibson extorted everybody into voting for his film in 1995. It'd be horrible, y'all didn't vote for my movie. Like, you want me to show up at your house at like 3 in the morning.
It's all right. Look, Hollywood is welcomed back in.
Yeah.
With open arms at this point.
Yeah, I gotta beef with Mel Gibson because not only did he do this movie and butchered it, but then a couple of years later he does The Patriot. And it's like, okay, Bill Wallace moved to pre-colonial or pre-revolutionary in South Carolina. It's like, it's like
it's the same kind of vibe where it's like a movie that you go if you're a married couple and you need to revitalize your relationship a little bit. You go see a little sex and violence.
Yeah,
you go see The Patriot or you go see Braveheart.
And they're like, see, honey, it's not that bad. We have it good. We don't live when Mel Gibson tried to cut our head off.
And then you bring a little prima nocte role play into the bedroom.
Yeah, exactly.
And then everything's gravy in your marriage.
Yeah, and then the divorce is 5 years away. Like, it's just added 5 years to the marriage.
Yeah. Is there a movie that you would recommend people watch instead of Braveheart, especially if they're looking for a good historical war epic kind of movie?
Well, I mentioned the early Scottish.
The Picts, yeah.
Yeah, I mentioned them as a theme in Braveheart. So a movie to watch if you want to see a movie about that. I forget what year it came out, but the movie is called Centurion. Can't say that right.
I'm looking it up. Centurion, like Roman centurion, right?
Yeah.
So let's see. Centurion, disambiguation. The one from 2010, it looks like.
Yeah.
Neil Marshall. It's got Michael Fassbender in it, Dominic West.
Who's the chick with the blue face paint?
Olga Kurylenko. The Bond girl.
Okay, she's probably Russian, and I'm not a fan of Russians, but, I mean, she's great in that movie. And that movie, if you want to see a better Braveheart, watch Centurion, because it tells the story of who Mel Gibson was sort of LARPing at, and it's a accurate portrayal of the conquering power in the Romans. It's not the English, but it's the Romans, but it's an accurate portrayal of what their tyranny looked like. Whereas in Braveheart, it was like they're sort of depicted as this velvet glove, oppressionary force that's sort of unstoppable. Whereas in Centurion, the Romans are seen on their way out, even though they win. In the movie, they're seen as being driven from the Isle of Britain, as the Picts. Because the Picts fucked their world up. Like, the Picts, you know what they used to do to the Romans?
No, what they used to do.
They used to go in at night and they would steal their supplies, they would steal their food, and then they would take their horses naturally. But then they would also cut off the legs of the ones who could ride horses. So and those people were actually the people who could go out and hunt. So they would take their food, but then they would take their ability to get more food.
Right.
And they would pretty much, really brutal stuff.
Yeah, it sounds like it.
But that was, I think that's where Trump got his idea for the wall was Hadrian. Because, as soon as you have to start building a wall, you pretty much say, I'm tapping out. It's just tapping out. But
listen, as long as Trump doesn't build a wall with the bodies of Mexicans who have died over the course of trying to cross the border, I think we'll be a little bit less uncomfortable as a nation.
Well, I don't think he would ever embrace Ann Coulter's idea. That sounds like Ann Coulter's idea.
Yeah,
but,
it does.
But I think Centurion's a better movie. They actually had a movie come out recently called Black 47, which is about the Irish potato famine. That in the blurbs that appear on the screen during the trailer, they called it the Irish Braveheart, and it made me have more muscle tension than I already have. I'm like, ooh, just, how bad it feels to dry heave with cerebral palsy. Not good.
Well, listen, Joe, thanks for coming on today, man.
Okay, that was a great note to end on.
I will not be watching Braveheart. You have convinced me to continue to not watch it, or The Patriot, for that matter. But
Patriot's not as bad, but don't. You're better off.
You know what you should watch instead of this is Joe's battle for this most recent season of Roast Battle. It's
when Nicole Buchanan.
Yeah, it's online. Check it out. It's on Comedy Central's website and YouTube channel. Joe Eurell versus former guest Nicole Buchanan. Great battle. Fantastic fight.
Thank you.
And where else can the listeners find you on the internet?
You can follow me on Twitter at JOE_EURELL. Look up notspecial.live or just type in Joe Eurell Not Special. I put out my own 30 minutes because I stole the idea from Braveheart. I made it myself. I'm kidding. But yeah, it's worth it. Check out Roast Battle. I'm here every 6 weeks or so.
Yeah, roughly. You got a good schedule going.
Yeah. Check it out on Periscope.
And you can find me on the internet at Diet J on Twitter and Instagram. Check out jlightcomedy.com for show dates. And listen and subscribe. Leave a rating on iTunes too, why don't you?
Do it.
Folks, this has been Blockbusting. Go see something good for a change.